Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure to be here this evening and to be able to welcome you to the University of Wollongong. Universities, of course, play a whole range of roles in society. You know, one of our tasks is to create new knowledge, and here at Wollongong we do that through our research agenda. We're charged to produce highly skilled graduates, and here at Wollongong I think we have now 110,000 alumni, people who've graduated from this university over the years, and we're charged to exchange knowledge with businesses and other sectors in the community. I think all universities think very carefully about their roles in regions, and I think this is an international phenomenon. Across the whole of Australia, you can see 40 universities playing a phenomenal role in trying to build capacity in each of the regions that they have a responsibility for. At Wollongong, we were founded in 1951 and we became autonomous in 1975 from the University of New South Wales, and we did those two things driven actually by the demand here in the community. There was a Lord Mayor's appeal, a huge amount of community momentum behind both of those steps, and a real drive from citizens in the Illawarra and specifically here in Wollongong to say we needed a university that was going to be fit for purpose for the circumstances of the region we live in. And that's an ongoing role that we've had. We are here in part to create debate and here in part to showcase new ideas and new thought processes and new ways of doing things. How have we done that? Well, in the last 12 months, we've done a lot. Late last year, we held a TEDx in the main hall of this university, and that was focused on bionics. Next week, we have our second TEDx, and that's focused on livability associated with the major conference on infrastructure development that the university is hosting. Earlier this year, we had a Big Ideas Festival, and 12 newly minted professors from the university showcased their ideas or aspects of their research in a brief and interactive process. And tonight we're privileged to have 6 public intellectuals, including 4 visitors from overseas, talk to us about their views of some of their work in social sciences and what that might mean for transforming lives and regions. In advance of their presentations, I wanted to say thank you to all of those individuals who put aside their time to produce these presentations, and I wanted to say thank you to all of you for coming, because we have a large audience for an event like this, and I think it suggests that the appetite that we have for hearing still around how lives and regions might be transformed, and I think we're in for a treat. Thank you very much, and I'm now going to pass to Professor Judy Raper, Deputy Vice-Chancellor of Research, who's going to say a little bit about the Global Challenges Programme. Thank you very much.
I have to adjust this. Thank you very much, Paul. Over the coming decades, we'll face many challenges and transformations in the way we live our lives. The UOW Global Challenges Program, launched in July this year, recognises the interconnected nature of these transformations. We launched the program to identify and focus on areas where the university can make genuine impact on significant issues facing the world. The program is designed to encourage and develop creative and community-engaged research that will help drive social, economic and cultural change in our region, but will also be translatable across the globe. There are thousands of regions just like ours across the globe, and we believe that by impacting our own region, we can make impact on the world. The video you've been watching as you came in is just a taster, but there's more to come. The initial three challenges, living well longer, manufacturing innovation, and sustaining coastal and marine zones, are united by our overarching research goal, transforming lives and regions. Each global challenge involves collaboration between UOW researchers and business, government, community, and other research organisations. We're strategically investing in this ambitious program to bring together researchers from diverse disciplines. As Karl Popper wrote, we are not students of some subject matter, but students of problems. And problems may cut across the borders of any subject matter or discipline. That's even more true today than 50 years ago. Tonight's forum is the first of many public engagement activities for the Global Challenge program. And it's fitting that we're talking about a social sciences perspective, because social sciences research will play a pivotal role in each of our challenges, ensuring that we focus on the delivery and adoption of research outputs that have maximum impact in key areas of social, economic, and community need. I'm looking forward to hearing from our expert panel and to engaging with all of you as well as the program progresses, and we wish to bring it to a fruitful success in the next few years. So thank you.
Well, good evening, everybody. My name's Neril East, and I'm very pleased to be your facilitator this evening. Thank you for the invitation to do that. Isn't it wonderful to have so many people here for this public conversation? Fantastic. And welcome to the folks who are joining us on the live stream. Yes, you're on candid camera tonight, maybe from the back anyway, but that's fantastic, and we know that it will be great to have this event recorded. So on that note, can I please ask you to turn off your mobile phone, because this aircraft has taken off and it might interfere with our flight instruments. And if the phone does ring, you're kind of going to be recorded for posterity on the live stream and the recording of that. So please just take a sec to do that now. Thank you. We've got a fantastic lineup of panellists tonight who've travelled a long way to be here. But I want to start by just asking for a show of hands. Who thinks that we are in a pretty special part of the world right here? Yeah, not too many hands down. We're pretty lucky, aren't we? And it's very easy here in Wollongong, here in our beloved Gong, to get parochial and kind of shut out the fact that there are significant global challenges around us. So this evening is an opportunity to broaden our vision and to just think about how our place in the world impacts on the places of others and the very future of our planet. So I'm going to introduce our speakers. Now, you'll get to meet them all in a minute, so I'll just run through their names and then we'll have applause for all of them at the end, and then I'll introduce them one by one, and they're going to speak to you with their take on the theme of our evening, Transforming Lives and Regions, and you'll be pleased to know that we'll be throwing it open to questions. So as they're speaking, think of some questions that you'd like to ask, because this is a conversation. So we want to be participative tonight, and we invite your questions after the panel have spoken. So I'll just introduce our special guest tonight. First up, we have Professor Iram Siraj, Professor of Early Childhood Education at the Institute of Education UK. Professor Ted Meluish, Professor of Human Development at Birkbeck, University of London, and Research Professor at the University of Oxford. Professor Noel Castry, Professor of Geography at Manchester University and soon to be University of Wollongong. He might tell you more about that. Professor Tony Gattrell, Dean of the Faculty of Health and Medicine at Lancaster University. Professor Sandra Jones, Director of the Centre for Health Initiatives at the University of Wollongong. Sandra hasn't had to travel so far to be here, but we're very pleased that she's joining us on the panel this evening. And Professor Hugh Mackay, Honorary Professor of Social Science at the University of Wollongong. Please welcome our very distinguished panellists. So as I've said, each of our panellists, our first 5 panellists, will speak for a few minutes on their take on our theme for this evening. So I'm delighted to welcome our first speaker to the lectern here. Please welcome Professor Iram Siraj.
Thank you, Neril. I'm very pleased to be here. I'd like to thank colleagues at the University of Wollongong for the invitation to be here, the Vice-Chancellor, Paul Wellings, and especially the Faculty of Social Sciences. I've had a great week, and it's a privilege to speak at this event, the public conversation on transforming lives and regions. Unsurprisingly, being a professor of early childhood education, my focus is going to be on young children and the role that human resources have to play in transforming the lives of young children and families. Early interventions are well known for turning lives around. Focusing on stimulating homes is important, and promoting schools that can deliver effective education is very important in young lives. Why is early education important? In my work, I know that the influences on the attainment gap, which is growing in countries like ours, not just the UK, but in the United States, different parts of Europe, and as I understand it, in Australia as well. There is an attainment gap, and this has implications for how people feel in their communities and the contribution that they can make. The biggest gap that occurs is in the first 5 years. And Ted will talk about how that gap can be maintained because of those influential experiences in the first 5 years. What are those experiences? The major experience seems to be around poverty. So when colleagues talk about jobs, about education, it has a huge impact on children's development and parents' ability to offer them the resources that they need. Another aspect, though, it's not just poverty of material things, but also poverty of social and cultural capital can be a real problem in people's lives. Through our research, we've also found that the early home learning environment is a very powerful predictor of children's later outcomes, almost as powerful as mothers' education, particularly mothers who are graduates, and socioeconomic status in the family. We found that early childhood education in our 16-year longitudinal study, our children are now all over 16, but their examination results show that the quality and effectiveness of their preschool is still having an impact at age 16. And the quality and effectiveness, academic effectiveness, of a primary school matters too. The timeline of development, as you can see, it doesn't matter if you can't see the detail, but it starts from here, minus 9 months conception, to 70 months here. And you can see that there is rapid development from birth through to the first year, and that development continues not so rapidly, but still fairly rapid compared to other time spans in our lives. Nobel Prize-winning economist James Heckman shows how investment in preschool education, particularly high-quality preschool education, gives us the biggest bang for our buck, as it were, compared to, say, school or post-school education. And a problem that we have in our country, in the UK, and I think in many other countries, is that many of our staff in the preschool sector are probably the least qualified compared to other sectors. And I think this has implications workforce-wise and the quality of what children receive. Having said that, quite often preschools are still better equipped than some homes in providing children with stimulating environments. The risks to young children's attainment and positive behaviour, and therefore later behaviour within society, is predicated on a number of risks. Poverty, poor bonding and attachment. There is often more maternal depression, lack of stimulation in the home and community, inconsistent parenting, and lack of aspirations. Luckily, we can do something about these things. We can introduce protective factors. Families can introduce protective factors to support their children. But poverty can create cumulative risks, and they become more evident as the children grow. There are risks associated with poorer cognitive development, psychological distress and behavioural problems, slower and lower quality communicative development. So all 5 areas of children's development are critical. We often hear from education departments or governments about the cognitive abilities and executive functioning of children and communication skills, but many of us who are involved with young children and families and researching them would argue that social, personal, emotional behaviours, gross and fine motor skills, physical development are equally important. And it delighted me to have spent the last 2 days with the emerging identity of the new Faculty of Social Sciences, who are particularly strong in all these areas. I look forward to remaining in contact with that faculty and learning about their collaborative work. It's not all straightforward, though. If you want to transform lives and regions, you have to think about what things look like from the point of view of lay people within communities. And what's usually seen in policies for young children and families looks like chaos to the outsider. Many parents see that their children are required to, partake in health routines like immunisations and so on. There's social services, early interventions, family support, education, and they're quite often mediated through preschools, parenting centres, childcare, children's mental health centres, kindergartens, and so on. It's baffling enough for those of us in education to work out which kind of centres do what, long daycare compared to kinder prep classes, family daycare and so on. Imagine what it's like if you're the parent of a first child. Through research, we have established the importance of an integrated approach, like the early engagement centres proposed as part of the Early Start, which will be based in this university, a fantastic investment of $44 million to develop a bespoke centre that will be there for the community and encourage learning in this area. And they are directly related to 38 early engagement centres all around New South Wales. These centres, we hope, will provide the coherence and become centres of excellence and models for this kind of approach, where there would be early intervention, family support, social services, health, education, and a framework that will lead to better positive child outcomes, and they are all located in more needy communities, more disadvantaged communities. How can we make this a reality for vulnerable children and families? How can we transform lives and regions through this focus? Well, I think that we have to look at what the research tells us, and there is a lot of research internationally that shows that we should try and identify risks and resilience factors early on. What are we've looked at some of the risk factors. What are the resilience factors? Well, there are a lot, and I will come to them. We should use effective interventions as early as possible and use multiple approaches. For example, if children have language difficulties or early reading difficulties, not only to target the children, but also family members. And work with families and service providers. Regardless of how important we think we are in education and the social sciences, children do spend most time with their families and are most influenced by them, either for good or bad. So what do we know from our research in terms of direct ways of reducing children's risk of poor outcomes? This is the human resource that is our future, that will face a lot of the mega challenges that the Vice-Chancellor has spoken to us about today. It is a challenge for us to improve the quality of early home learning environment, what parents do with their children before the age of 4. And I'll show what that looks like from our research. To provide high quality preschool and to encourage attendance, From our research, we know that going once or twice a week isn't as good as going 4 or 5 times, having 4 or 5 sessions a week for children, particularly after the age of 2. It's a little bit, if you were using a medical model, it's a bit like feeding a child, 1,500 calories for every day of the week compared to 3,000 calories on 2 days of the week. It's not going to work as well. So having an even intervention that's called preschool education that's of high quality can have a huge impact. Language and literacy interventions, such as the Webster Stratton, or more local bespoke interventions, child protection, parent education, and for more disadvantaged children, an earlier start and more intensive interventions for the neediest children. Our research at the University of London, mine and Ted's, has shown how children from disadvantaged backgrounds, all children, benefit from an earlier start in preschool. And from this year, our government is offering 40% of children in the lowest SES population, that's quite a large percentage, 240,000 places by next September are free for all 2-year-olds. What we found about the home learning environment in our study is that these behaviours by parents are particularly powerful in giving children a good cognitive start. And there were many disadvantaged parents who had poor material resources, but were providing these experiences regularly for their children, and their children had a head start at the age of 3, which was maintained at 5, at 7, at 11, at 14, and now at 16. That's powerful. Recommended practice for early childhood services, we need to collect data on poverty. Centres need to have information. And one thing we've learnt in England through the government looking at our research and trying to apply these sort of practices is that we are data rich but information poor. That you can have a lot of data, but if it's not accessible and match health data matching with education data and so on, we need good data sources that are usable by practitioners. Combine approaches for both the child and family, focus on quality, duration and interventions, and invest in training, leadership and service coordination. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Iram. So much food for thought there, whether on so many levels, whether you're a parent, as academics and teachers, or citizens of the world. So much to consider there. To continue the conversation, please welcome to the lectern Professor Ted Maluish. Thanks, Ted.
Well, it's a great pleasure to be here, and I'd like to tell you about some of the work we've developed in Europe, and we can consider its applicability to Australia. Now, in Europe in 2050, there'll be a working population will decrease by 50 million, while the elderly will grow by 50%. So economic sustainability will require maximizing the capacity of the workforce. Yet, we live in a world where the skills for good outcomes are rising and challenging. We can know that the school leavers of today will be going into jobs that we don't even know about now. This is already happening because of the great changes in our technologies. And there is still great inequality of opportunity, and that's wasting resources because we're wasting possible skills and people's capacities. Now, both cognitive and non-cognitive skills are critical. So how can these be improved? Well, this is an important challenge for all of us. In the OECD, in a report in 2012, documented 20% of the population of OECD countries do not achieve basic minimum skills for employability in a modern society. Now, this problem is twice as great for disadvantaged groups. And disadvantaged groups have greater risk, as Iram was saying, for poverty, criminality, poor health, social and emotional problems, attention, cognitive and language problems, and this affects educational progress, literacy, numeracy, social skills, employability, health, adjustment, and criminality. So there really are very fundamental consequences of this lack of skills amongst the population. Now, one approach to this is to look at disadvantaged groups and intervene with disadvantaged groups through giving them, as Erin was saying, early intervention, early education. And the most well-known study in this respect was started in the 1960s in the USA, called the Perry Preschool Study, where it took 123 African-American children in extreme poverty and randomly assigned them at age 3 to an early education program or no program, which the program being daily high-scope classes, which is a high-quality early education program with planned learning activities and also weekly home visits to the families. And these children are now in their 50s, and we can look at their earnings when they were 27 or 40 years of age, well into adulthood. And we see the results here for the red, which are the program group, and blue, the no program group. And you see, on earnings, the program group do much better. On employment, the program do better. They're more likely to own their own home, own car, to have savings accounts. So on all those economic indicators, they're doing a hell of a lot better. Remember, this is only the result of interventions for 3 years in terms of early education between ages 3 and 6. We also, besides these economic issues, we can look at behavioral problems. They're much less likely to have discipline problems, less likely to be arrested, either at 27 or at 40, less likely to be involved in violent crime, less likely to be involved in drug crime. So there are really profound differences, which are really long-term. Now, at age 21, they calculated the savings as a result of these improved education, improved employability, and so on, to be over $88,000 for each child. Yet the program itself only cost $12,000 per child. So you're getting over a 7-to-1 return on your investment. By age 40, that return on investment had reached 15-to-1. Now that's a very well-known study with a very special group of children living in extreme poverty. We might ask, what about the general population? Well, Iram and I and a team of other people have been involved in this study of over 3,000 children in England, where we've been looking at the impact of a variety of factors in their lives on these children. And at age 11, every child in the study, every child in England, in fact, took the same assessment in literacy and numeracy. And when we look at the results on these assessments, we find that income is important. And we also find that mother's education is important. The red is literacy and the blue is numeracy. Mother's education, in fact, is the most important and strongest effect of all. Then next to mother's education, we see father's education. And we see father's education is about half that of mother's education. Now we know mothers are twice as important as fathers. Alternatively, we should tell these fathers to get off their backsides and do a lot more with the children, because that's why this difference exists, because the mothers are much more involved with the children than the fathers. And then we have socioeconomic status having an effect, quite a strong effect there as well. And then we have the home learning environment that Iram talked about. A very strong effect on literacy, almost as strong as mother's education, even at age 11, even though this early home learning environment was measured when the children were 3 years old, 8 years previously. And then it also has a strong effect on numeracy. Then we see the effect here of going to a high-quality preschool versus no preschool. And we see that there's quite strong effects on literacy, but even stronger effects on numeracy. And then we have the effect of going to a highly effective primary school versus a relatively poor primary school. And we see, again, similar effects on literacy and numeracy. So we see here, 6 years after the children left the preschool, they're having strong effects of their preschool environment. Now, if you look at the relative size of the effect of preschool and primary school, you see they're almost identical. Yet the average child in our study went to a preschool for 18 months. Yet they'd been in a primary school for 6 years. I leave you to consider the relative benefits of investing in preschool versus investing in primary school. Also, on the number of measures, we were able to look at the trajectories of children over time. say from age 3 to age 11, as in this diagram. And when we do that over these 3,000 children, we find 6 fairly stereotypical trajectories. Not every child will fit into these trajectories, but most children approximate closely to one of these trajectories. And we see one trajectory at the top there, the red line marked number 6. The children score on an average around a standard deviation above the average, which is the 0 line. And they're doing that fairly consistently right across the age range. About 12% of children were like that. Then we have another group, number 5, the dark blue line. And here we have children who start off quite a bit above average, but they then fall off to be above average. Then we have 2 large groups, number 4 and number 3. 4 is the pink line, and what they do is they start off about average, but then they climb up and then are fairly consistently above average, whereas number 3 fall off over time and then are fairly consistently below average. Then we have group 2, who start off below average, but climb up and become around about average. And then we have group 1, who start off very low and stay low. They're about 8% of those kids. And there are a number of lessons from this graph. One is, we can look at those children who are in the more favorable trajectories versus the children who are in the relatively unfavorable trajectories. And we can look at what differentiates them. And amongst the factors which differentiate these are going to a high-quality preschool and having a good home learning environment. Also, if I were to draw a vertical line between age 5 and 6, imagine a vertical line going up that graph between age 5 and 6. And then ask yourself, what's happening to the right of that line? The answer is nothing. The children are staying in their same relative positions after that age. All the change is taking place at the preschool level. That doesn't mean that you can't get change later on for an individual child, yes. But in terms of population level change, if you don't act in those preschool years, you're unlikely to get any significant population change. Also, I think it's quite interesting to look at this group number 1. This is a group who, by age 3, are in a really low trajectory. So that indicates that for groups like that, we probably need to act before age 3 to get any significant change. Now, our work has had significant impact on policy in the UK, like a free part-time early childhood education place from 3 years upwards, from 2004 onwards. And from this year onwards, we have a free part-time place for every child in the 40% most deprived families from age 2 upwards. We've also had maternity leave increased to 1 year. We have a new early years curriculum, new training programs for early years staff, and an acceptance that early years spending is part of government responsibilities. And we also have the establishment of children's centres, which provide integrated support, family support, healthcare, and education and childcare for those children living in poorest areas. I did something wrong then, did I? Oh. Okay. And it's not just British data that shows this. This is data I've taken from a World Bank report on Latin America. If we look at this is data from a number of Latin American countries. Look at the red line. The red line is the percentage of children who get access and use a preschool. And we see that it's very low in Paraguay, and it's almost 100% in Cuba. Then the blue line, look at the blue line. The blue line is the assessment of children at age 12 by a standard assessment in all of those countries. And we see that the blue line almost directly parallels the red line. And in the opposite direction, we see the green line going in the opposite direction, where the green line indicates under 5 mortality, that is a chance of a child dying or having a serious illness in the first 5 years, going the opposite way. Now, we might ask ourselves, look at Cuba. It's doing so much better than every other Latin American country. Why is that? Well, in Cuba, they have free polyclinics from pregnancy onwards, provide free healthcare in pregnancy, free health checks, etc., all the way through childhood. the child has access to free childcare and free early education in the early years. And that's why Cuba is getting these much better results than the other Latin American countries. But Cuba is a long way from being the richest of these Latin American countries. Argentina, Uruguay, Chile, and so on are much richer countries. Yet Chile concentrates its limited resources on providing very good early childhood services, and the outcomes for its children are significantly better. So we can see from both detailed national evidence in particular countries like the UK and in using macro-level data from across countries, the same message is coming across. Early years services can make a dramatic effect on the lives of children, can improve the employability of children, can reduce the likelihood of criminality, improve the social adjustment of children, and so on. And when you bear in mind those earlier statistics I was giving you about the way in which the very low level of basic skills for 20% of the population, this shows us the ways in which we might be able to produce change in the population which will make life better in the future, particularly for children from disadvantaged circumstances. And with that, I'll say goodbye.
Thank you so much, Ted, for that fascinating insight. So again, lots of food for thought, and I'm sure there'll be lots of questions at the end of the speeches here. I'd now like to welcome our next speaker, and he's taking the opportunity during this visit to look for places to live because he'll be joining the University of Wollongong next year. Please welcome to the microphone Professor Noel Castry.
Just going to do a Judy here and drop the microphone down. Okay, well, just like to echo the thanks that have been extended to various people. I've had a wonderful week and have been made to feel very, very welcome. So the people in question know who they are, and thank you very, very much. Okay, so we're here to talk about the theme of transforming lives and regions and the role that research might play in that. And we're also having this event at a time when there's a new social sciences faculty here at the University of Wollongong, as we've heard. So what I'd like to do is tell you 3 stories about 3 different kinds of transformative social science, one relating to transformative thinking, one kind of research relating to transformative evidence, and one relating to transformative practice. And as you'll discover, one of the examples relates to something I've written a lot about, which is the way in which we conceptualize nature. So we're going to move now away from the focus on young children that we've just heard. But then I'm going to talk about 2 other examples from my own field, geography, by colleagues of mine in other universities. Now, before I come to the 3 examples, I'd just like to set the scene by offering some contextual comments. And the first one's about transformation, how we think about transformation. And when we think about transformation in the social sciences, we have a pretty hard time competing with the physical sciences. And I think you would all agree that the physical sciences have had a transformative effect on our world, and that goes back many, many decades. And one of the principal ways in which the physical sciences transform our world, of course, is through technologies. Microwave ovens, cars, iPads, and so on and so forth. And in fact, I just purchased an iPad recently. I haven't seen it because my children have been using it, and it's caused a lot of problems in our household. And it's one example of the way in which technology can very quickly change behavior, change the dynamic, in this case, of my household. So the social sciences, we can't transform the world in that way. We don't produce technologies. We have to deal with people. And if you define, social science as about helping people understand themselves and improve their lives, well, then what that means is that transformation is often slow because you're trying to change behaviors, habits, norms, and practices. Okay. The second contextual comment then is really about social science and how it's perceived in the public domain. Certainly in Britain, and it may be a little different here in Australia, I would suggest that social science isn't terribly visible in the public domain. And there are a few Brits in the room, and Paul has spent a long time living in the UK. And the Brits here, and Paul and anyone else who spent time in the UK will know that if you were to think of the most famous academic in the UK right now, it isn't a social scientist, unsurprisingly. It's a physical scientist, and he's called Brian Cox. He's at the University of Manchester, and he's an astrophysicist, and he's on TV all the time. He's a great speaker, and he's having a great time, and he's very visible. If you ask most people to name a visible social scientist in Britain, they would really struggle to find a name. Even someone as distinguished as Anthony Giddens wouldn't be mentioned by many people. So there's a bit of a problem in terms of visibility. And when people do think of social science, I think they often think of the applied social sciences when they're thinking about transformative effects. So social work would be a good example. So what I want to do in my 3 quick examples is do a bit of a shout out for social science research that isn't vocational. It isn't applied in the normal sense of what the word applied means, but nonetheless, it stands to have transformative effects, even though the researchers involved don't quite know what those effects will be at the start of their research projects. Okay, so to my first example then, and this is about transformative thinking. So this is a case of social science, or a social scientist, as you'll discover, helping us rethink the way that we think. And here I want to talk about the ideas contained in a book called Rambunctious Gardens. Some of you may have read it. The subtitle is Saving Nature in a Post-Wild World. And it's authored by an American writer called Emma Maris. And what's interesting to me as a geographer is that Maris's ideas in this book, which has received a very positive reception, particularly in America and Canada, although it's quite a controversial book, is the ideas in the book echo those advocated not just by myself, but by a number of environmentally minded social scientists over the last 25 years, including Professor Leslie Head at the University of Wollongong. So let me say a little bit about the book and what the ideas contained in it look like. So what Maris argues for is a paradigm shift in thinking about what nature is and which nature we value. And with an eye on the United States and Canada especially, she suggests that for too long, remote wilderness areas like the Yellowstone National Park have been the focus of nature conservation. And in their pristine condition, she argues, we've tended to contrast these areas both to the highly contrived landscapes of, say, a botanical garden, like the one we've got quite close to us here at Wollongong University, and contrast those pristine spaces with the many small, unmanicured, but distinctly non-natural green spaces found in our towns, cities, and along transportation arteries. But what, she asks, if we stop seeing nature as something limited to faraway wilderness areas and begin to see it as something on our doorsteps, something which we can help to flourish, not by leaving it alone, but by doing things to it? And she calls this nature 2, the nature we don't see and we don't really value because we've learnt to consider it rather inferior or in need of incredible levels of detailed management, as you find in a typical garden or a botanical garden. So she's really talking here about the nature all around us, on railway sidings, in brownfield sites and so on. And the kind of nature you find in these spaces is a real melange of species. And for her, and for me as well, it invites innovative conservation approaches, including rewilding, assisted migration, and the embrace of so-called novel ecosystems. And what's distinctive about these approaches, she argues, is that they don't try to protect what's left of pristine nature, what she calls nature 1, but to create new wild landscapes rich in biodiversity, not by manicuring them or intervening too much, but by sort of getting them going and letting them be. And a great example of that, and some of you will know this, is Oosterwaardeplassen in Holland, which is an attempt to create a 20,000-year-old European landscape by sort of creating the conditions for it and then sort of letting it flourish all by itself. Really interesting. So that's about transformative thinking. Second example then, quickly, just to relate to transformative information that has a direct impact on lives. And I'm going to refer now to research done by a colleague of mine called Kevin Morgan at the University of Cardiff with another Cardiff geographer called Robert Sonnino. And this was in the early part of the last decade. And at that time, a few social scientists started to suggest that the diets of young Brits, despite the fact Britain's very wealthy, were not conducive to good health. And what Kevin Morgan and Robert Sonnino reasoned is that if this was a real problem, it was going to be addressed, it was far easier to influence a few thousand schools delivering daily meals to children than to influence millions of parents serving meals at home. And what their research did is it focused on the public procurement of school meals in 4 local authorities that were pioneers in trying to provide better diets for young children. One in England, one in Wales, one in Scotland, and one in Italy. And what Kevin and Robert did is they gathered systematic evidence that showed that these pioneering local authorities were able to use their huge purchasing power to buy better quality food from local suppliers at a lower cost than the bulk food that they previously been purchasing from large commercial wholesalers. And quite aside from the cost savings, the research showed other local governments then a way to improve child health, to reduce their ecological footprint, and to improve their sort of public reputations with their local populations. And all this was done prior to a now famous TV series fronted by the chef Jamie Oliver, which focused on school meals. So it was pioneering, it was based on evidence and showing local authorities, look, you can do this because it's happened elsewhere, here's the evidence, we can demonstrate it. And it's led to recent national policies intended to transform the quality and locational sourcing of school food at the local authority scale. My third example then, and finally, is about transformative practice. So this is where social scientists become part of the things they're analysing from the get-go, rather than aiming for a certain critical distance. And I want to focus here on work done by a friend of mine, a London University economic geographer called Jane Wills. Now, in 2001, Jane was invited by a civil society organisation called TELCO, that's the East London Community Organisation, to calculate the impacts on low-income people in East London of being paid a so-called living wage, as opposed to simply the minimum wage that had been instituted in the late 1990s by the new Labour government. Now, as you all know, London is extraordinarily wealthy, but also highly expensive, and it is riven with social inequality. And since the late 1980s, not only private firms, but many public institutions have contracted out a number of things like security and cleaning services. And in London especially, these contractors have tended to employ recent immigrants from Europe or the Commonwealth or elsewhere in the world and pay either a minimum wage or even a sub-minimum wage to those workers. So what Jane Wills did is she analysed the impacts on the quality of life of these immigrants if they were paid nearly £7 an hour, as opposed to the £4 to £5 most of them were receiving. And unsurprisingly, she discovered by talking to them and doing household budgets, it would make a significant difference and improvement in their lives. What was surprising, though, is that what Jane discovered doing some economic modelling is that the overall costs, if big institutions, private firms, public organisations were not to contract out cleaning and security services, the actual cost wouldn't increase appreciably because the contractors were taking a big cut of the money that was being paid to them and not giving their workers very much at all. So that was about gathering evidence, but then she went a step further. And backed by TELCO, this organisation, and the trades union called Unison, she used her research to show a range of large public sector and private organisations that, by contracting out to low-wage service providers, they were actively contributing to social hardship, which, aside from being ethically problematic, could have reputational damage for those institutions. And so in recent years, her involvement in what's become the East London Living Wage campaign has persuaded the Royal London Hospital, Barclays Bank, and her own university college, Queen Mary, to do one of two things: either only contract out to firms that pay a weighted London living wage, or to bring services in-house again. And what's more, it's brought many low-paid East London immigrant workers into organisations like Unison, where their rights are protected and defended. So 3 examples, 3 different cases of social science making a difference, but not in quite the applied vocational way that many of us might think of when we think of relevant social science. Thank you.
Thank you, Noel. So, some global challenges, but it's great to hear that specific initiatives do make a difference. And it's fantastic to hear some of those case studies and examples tonight. I'd now like to introduce to the microphone Professor Tony Gattrell to address us. Thank you, Tony.
Thank you very much, Noel. As the 4th overseas visitor, I'd like to echo what my colleagues and friends have had to say, which is that we've had a very warm welcome here this week, and I'd also like to say this is my first visit to Australia, and I feel very fortunate that my first encounter with the country has been in New South Wales, has been in the Illawarra region, and has been at the University of Wollongong. I think this is a very special place, and already I've got a strong sense of an intellectual community here, a strong sense of identity, And I think you're really going places, so I think it's a great place to come, and I'm deeply envious of Noel Castry, who's coming here to work. So, yes, transforming lives and regions. Could you, thank you very much. Of course, as an academic, you immediately want to take the task you've been given and ask questions about it. So the first thing that occurred to me was to ask the question, whose lives are we seeking to transform? And it seems to me that with the Early Start programme that you're engaged in here under Paul Chandler's leadership with others is a truly innovative programme and a fantastic opportunity to genuinely transform the lives of young people, particularly those who live in relatively disadvantaged circumstances. And what I think appeals to me in particular is the notion that the lives that you're trying to transform, the young people's lives, they are the people who in 25, 30, 35 years' time will be the innovators, the business people, the concerned citizens, the engaged citizens of the future. And that's why I think it's important. So you're transforming lives, but you're transforming lives throughout the life course. But I'm also interested in older people, and I noticed that one of the themes in your Global Challenges program is looking at, I think it's called Living Well and Living Longer, and it's about the lives of older people. So I guess I'm keen to bat for the older people, being one myself, and I could present a stream of evidence or data on how the population across the world, and not just in the global north, but in the emerging economies as well, is growing. And just to take one piece of data, there's 3.25 million people living in your country who are over the age of 65 years. And that's 14% of the population. It's 13% of the population in China, but 13% of the Chinese population is quite a large number. I think it's 175 million, something like that. That's a lot of people aged over 65. Okay, so I wanted to ask the question, whose lives are you going to transform? Then, of course, I want to ask the question, what region are you going to transform? And geographers like Noel and me and many others have anguished for many, many years about what regions are. They're not categorically administrative areas. I like to think of them as places that are connected in a series of networks. And these networks might be economic networks, they might be social, they might be cultural. They're connected by flows of goods, of people, of ideas that connect these places together in sets of networks. And I think what you've got here in the university, which is categorically part of the community, it's not in the community, it's part of the community, you've got an opportunity to do some transformational work if the university and the colleagues in that university work in collaboration with those living in Wollongong and Illawarra region. But to do this, it needs a number of ingredients. It needs vision, it needs enthusiasm, it needs willingness of people in the university and outside the university to engage with each other in creating new knowledge, co-producing new knowledge, in promoting enterprise, and that doesn't just mean making money, enterprise in the wider sense of the word. It means developing human capital, and by that I don't just mean transforming the lives of 18 to 21-year-old students. I think it also means lifelong learning, and it also means improving social equality, social justice, by regenerating the community and helping improve cultural life. But to understand transformation, you need data. Now, you saw a lot of good data, rich data from Ted and Iram a few moments ago. I'm a geographer, and although I'm not one of the geographers who think geography is only about maps, I do use maps in my work, and I think maps are often a very valuable and useful tool. And let me give you an example. My example, I think, is coming from volunteering. Volunteering. And volunteering, it is well known, can massively improve the health and well-being both of the people who are engaged in the volunteering, but also in those who they're trying to assist in some way. So it helps develop social capital, which is a phrase you've already heard. It helps to develop support networks. It helps to develop the volunteers' own self-esteem and their quality of life, as well as that of others. And I found the figure from the Australian Bureau of Statistics recently that volunteering contributes $42 billion each year to the Australian economy. That's quite a lot of money. And as well as contributing economically, it also has the social benefits that I've alluded to. So I want to look at some data, and I want to look at it on a map. Now, colleagues, this is where the presentation might go completely haywire, because what I'm going to try to do is to locate a website, and specifically the website is from the Social Health Atlas of Australia. And it uses data from the 2011 census. Now, what I really need to do, I think, is to use the mouse in order to just demonstrate what I have in mind. So let me see if I can do that. Thank you very much. So, happily, we've managed to get a map on the screen. We've managed to access the website. What you have here is some data that is shown for part, I think, of the state of New South Wales. It shows the map. The areas it shows are census areas. And alongside the map, you can see data. Now, you won't be able to see unless you're sitting right in the expensive seats at the front. You won't be able to see the data down the left-hand side, but if you take it on trust that each row in that table refers to one of the census areas, and the second column refers to some data that is shown on the map. Then you have the map showing geographic or spatial variation. And at the bottom, that set of colors, that's a frequency distribution. That's a set of the data ordered from high to low rates. And I haven't told you what the variable is, the piece of information that's being mapped is. Well, it's actually the distribution of the male population, and particularly those aged 5 and under, which should be of interest to at least 2 people in the room. But I spoke about volunteering a moment ago, so I'm going to try and select from one of the pieces of data, and with a bit of luck, there's one called Community Strength. There we are. No. There we go. Okay. And specifically, it's on volunteering, and specifically, it's the percentage of those engaged in voluntary activity in an organisation or a group. What I'm also going to try to do is, and I might find it easier to do this with the keyboard, is to zoom in on a particular area. So now I'm going to try to interact with the map. I'm going to zoom in or try to zoom in on the map. Actually, before I get into too much trouble, what I'm going to do is speak to the map here. What I've tried to do is to locate in a bit more detail the area that we're in. But what I'm trying to convey is that you can pan around the map, you can click on a particular census area, you can see what that variable is, you can see the percentage of people engaged in volunteering. So the areas will mean more to you than they do to me, but there's one called Kilbarra Beach. Is that an area you know? Thank you. Somebody there from Kilbarra Beach. You'll be delighted to know that 19.7% of you were engaged in volunteering activity. I claim no credit for that myself. But the point is that you can look at the variation from place to place on the map. Now, if you weren't interested in volunteering, well, you should be. But if you were interested, for example, in data on the labour force or education or deprivation, I won't take up any more time, but I could map social deprivation, which is a composite of census variables, and you could look at geographic variation. So my point simply is that if you're wanting to transform lives and transform regions, you need to know where you're starting from. And maps can provide one tool, just one tool, to help you start that process. Thanks very much.
So who are all the backseat drivers in the room? Who was trying to move that mouse? Thanks very much, Tony. We're delighted. Wollongong was your first point of experience in Australia. So now to bring our presentations home before we take some questions, representing the home side, please welcome from the University of Wollongong, Professor Sandra Jones.
Thank you. I'm going to focus largely on Australia because that's where I am, and that's what I know. So I'm going to start with giving you some good news and some bad news. The good news is Australians are living longer, and we can see that life expectancy is increasing. The bad news is that we're not living well longer. So over the same period that our life expectancy increased, the average number of years that we spend in an unhealthy state increased more dramatically. Some of the improvements to healthy ageing of Australians will no doubt come about from science. New medications, new treatments, new machines, but the big improvements will come, and they need to come, from changes to our lifestyles and our behaviours. As a nation, and I'm sure lots of other nations are the same, we smoke too much, we drink too much, we eat too much, we don't do enough exercise, we ignore most of the screening recommendations. And if we're going to change those risk factors, we need evidence-based interventions. And they need to address two things. They need to address the individual, so we need to educate and empower people to change their behaviours. But more importantly, we need to change their environments. We actually need to change the physical, social and regulatory environments that people are in to enable them to make those healthy choices. And that's where we need research. We need really good research to identify what are the most effective ways to bring about changes in these risk factors at all life stages. And I'm going to talk from aged people going backwards. But what's really important, and several other people have spoken about this, we need to do this with communities and not to communities. And that's one of the things that I love about working at Wollongong, is that we have an amazing connection to our local community. So we're not out there just doing research about people, we're doing research with people. So I'm going to give you some examples of some of the problems and some of the things that we could and are doing about them. Dementia prevalence. We all know this. It's increasing dramatically in Australia as it is worldwide. The leading single cause of disability in older Australians. And there's lots of people around the world looking for cures, looking for treatments. But what we really need to do at the same time is focus on the growing number of people living with dementia who are in our community. And the first thing we need to do is we need to actually assist them to identify and access services. And this is an example of a project we did locally, which was really about enabling people with dementia and their carers to actually be able to navigate an incredibly complex service system. It is really, really hard for people to find care, to find resources, and this was developed in collaboration with the community in response to community needs to address some of those things. How do I find services in the Illawarra? How do I find the kinds of things that I need to help look after my loved one? But the second thing we need to do is to get people to this stage of actually help seeking, and that involves addressing things like stigma. The stigma associated with dementia is huge, and the real reluctance for people to seek diagnosis and seek treatment. And that's an area that I think we desperately need more research, is how can we actually have those conversations? How can we encourage people that there are actually services to help them and that they need to have these conversations? But the third thing, and probably the most important thing we need to be doing, is to actually engage people in behaviours that will reduce their risk of developing dementia. So it starts well before they get to be 70 or 80. We know there's lots of risk factors for dementia, and we know that a lot of them are not amenable to intervention. Unfortunately, at this stage, we can't stop people getting older. We can't do a whole lot about people's genetics. But we do know that people who have high blood pressure are at significantly greater risk of developing dementia. And we know that if we treat hypertension, we reduce people's risk of dementia by half. 7 out of 10 older Australians have high blood pressure, and a third of those people don't know that they have high blood pressure, and half of people are not being treated. So this is just an example of an intervention we ran in the local community in partnership with the health services, the GP services, around really trying to raise awareness. This wasn't an information campaign. We were out in the community taking people's blood pressure, providing resources for GPs. Quite a low budget intervention, but 30% of the people who had their blood pressure checked made a follow-up appointment with their GP and sought treatment for their blood pressure. That can have a huge impact on our dementia rates if we roll that out across broader communities. Other types of mental health disorders, an estimated 3.2 million Australians, so that's 20% of our adult population, had some form of mental disorder in 2011. It's the leading cause of our disability burden in this country, and it accounts for 24% of the life years lost due to disability. One group that's particularly at risk, mainly because they don't seek help, they don't seek treatment, is young people. So we know that 1 in 4 young people are living with a mental health condition such as anxiety or depression. We desperately need research into the most effective treatments for mental illness, but we also need more research into what are the most effective interventions to actually engage people in seeking help, in talking to someone, and in actually seeking early intervention, not waiting to the point that they're actually experiencing serious problems. Some of you may have seen these posters around campus. This is an intervention we're running at the moment targeting university students, and it's about starting those conversations, about raising young people's awareness of what some of the symptoms are of mental health issues and where they can go for help. And again, this was developed in collaboration with students, and it's a very interactive campaign. So we have events on campus, we're engaging people. So rather than just telling them what the risk factors are, telling them the statistics, which they've probably all had in class and got pretty bored with, we're doing things like going out and setting up photo booths in the community where they can dress out and act out the statistics and have conversations with people and providing them with referrals to services. Related to mental health, this is probably no surprise to anyone that I'm going to talk about this, Australia has a drinking problem. So do lots of other countries, but Australia has a significant drinking problem. The first part of the problem is the obvious one. We drink too much. So about half of our 20 to 29-year-olds and about a third of our 30 to 39-year-olds drink at a level that puts them at risk of immediate harm from that drinking occasion at least once a month. And it's not just young people. 16% of people in their 60s drink at the same level. So this is a problem. We know the interventions that are really effective, right? We know the things we could do to reduce alcohol-related harm. They're very simple. Increase the price of alcohol, reduce the availability, and restrict advertising. But that brings us to the second part of our problem, which is that this excessive drinking has become so much a part of our culture and part of our identity as a nation that we don't have those conversations and we don't have public support for the really successful interventions. People are concerned about drinking in this country, they really are, but they're concerned about other people's drinking. They're concerned about those people over there who drink in a way that interferes with my life and see their own drinking as problem-free. One of the things that really disturbs me about that is the impact that has on our children. So our children are growing up in an environment where they believe that everyone drinks and everyone drinks a lot. Actually, the majority of teenagers don't drink alcohol. So in 2011, only a third of our 15-year-olds had drank alcohol in the last month, and less than 20% had drank alcohol in the last week. But if you talk to teenagers, they think that all of their peers drink. They think that if they don't drink, they're somehow different and abnormal, and they think that the community approves of them drinking. Most parents think other parents think it's okay and feel pressured to provide alcohol to their children. This is a project we're just about to launch in Kiama, which is again being developed very much in collaboration with the community about having that conversation that actually most teenagers don't drink. Most parents don't provide alcohol and don't want to provide alcohol for their children, and most people in the local area actually don't think it's okay for young people to be drinking. And it's really, again, about starting those conversations and that broader cultural change, rather than saying to young people, it's about you, you're doing the wrong thing. Actually really having a serious look at how, as a community, we are influencing the way that young people drink by role modelling those behaviours. The other thing we have a problem with is we're getting fatter and we're getting less fit. Not any of you people in this room, the population in general. So we see consistent population level increases in BMI and reductions in physical activity. We really, really need to build a solid evidence base about what interventions work with different age groups in different communities. Obviously, there's a particular focus on childhood obesity because there is increasing evidence of an association between our weight as a young child and long-term health outcomes as an adult, including our levels of physical activity. And that's very similar to all the things you've heard earlier about cognitive development and all of those other skills. Early years are fundamentally important. So we need to find really good ways of making physical activity fun for kids. And that's getting harder and harder because we have to compete with the PlayStation, right? And the iPhone and the iPad and all those other things that seem so much more fun. This is an intervention that has been running in local schools, which is about teaching kids different ways of being active and about making being active fun. And also engaging parents and communities in those conversations, that meeting the physical activity guidelines doesn't mean you have to run around the oval for 60 minutes. It means you can use a hula hoop, you can throw a frisbee, you can go for a walk with your family. So this has been really, really well received in the community. Lots of schools getting on board and wanting to take part in this. And again, it's a good example of how we can start changing children's environments. Not saying go outside and play in the yard because the government says you should exercise 60 minutes a day, but actually providing activities in the community that are fun, that kids want to engage in. I've only got my maximum of 8 minutes, so I'm not going to tell you about all the other things we could be doing, but we are working at Wollongong and in lots of other places on solutions to lots of other problems, so organ donation, sexually transmitted infections, asthma, sun protection. All of these risk factors influence a whole range of diseases. If we can change these behaviours, we can reduce disease incidence. All of these things also substantially contribute to that increasing unhealthy life expectancy that I was talking about. And all of these things are amenable to change. But what we need is really good research into what are the most effective interventions, what are the most sustainable interventions that we can embed in communities that are actually going to work outside of an experimental environment. If we're going to make sure that our children have the best start to life and that our adults do live well longer, we really need to continue to explore ways that we can work with people and work with communities to engage people in behaviours that will improve their health, improve their lifestyle, and we need to transform our communities into really vibrant places that support those healthy lifestyles.
Global challenges, and we've been on a global journey tonight with so many different aspects under consideration. Time is tight, but we've got some time for some questions. I'm going to ask our panellists to come and join us on the couches. If you'd like to come out, please. And if you have a question, I'd ask you to raise your hand nice and high so I can see you, and we'll keep your question brief to the point and say who you're directing it to, unless it's a general one, and we'll work that out. And I'd ask our panellists to also keep their answers nice and punchy and to the point. And we have a question. Let's sit right at hand. Fellow in the red shirt right there. Thank you very much.
Hiya, Ross Gordon, Faculty of Social Sciences, Centre for Health Initiatives. One of the speakers mentioned earlier in their presentation a need to maximise capacity of the workforce to achieve continued economic development. I just wanted to ask the panel, do they believe that continued economic development and the associated consumption that goes with that is sustainable?
Okay, so I'll ask a panellist to put their hand up. Who would like to field that one? Looks like it's going through to the keeper. Economic development. Noel, is that something that you'd like to answer? Just, yeah, lift that up. That will be fine. Lift the whole thing up, I think. That will work.
I have to lean down, I think, because I don't know if this will come up.
Take it out of the cradle, that's it. Thank you. Thank you, Hugh. We're good to go.
I mean, that's a profound question, isn't it? And I'm afraid I don't have a profound answer. I mean, partly it's a question of values and judgments about whether the quality of life that we enjoy is the kind of life we want in the long term. My own view is that things do need to change in a sort of structural way. And I think one of the great tensions in trying to change the world is that the kind of changes you want to make in the short term, dealing with specific problems like, say, dementia or child health and so on and so forth, which are really, really important, often actually don't align very well with trying to make the big society-wide changes, which I think are implicit in the question. And, you know, we've had, in many countries, well over 25 years of quote, small government. And I think many people believe, and I'm one of them, that actually it's, in many countries it's time for government to use its considerable power to help us all make the kind of major changes that many people want to see happen.
Thank you so much. These are deep questions and time is tight, and I'm sure our panellists will chat to you afterwards as well. Any other questions? I saw some other hands there. Yes, thank you. Down the front here. Thank you.
Hi, Mike Calford. I'm a medical scientist, and it's difficult to ask a group of social scientists a question from a medical point of view without getting some kickback. And I don't want to open the nature-nurture debate, but I do want to talk a little bit about recent medical changes and our understanding of genetics, and in particular a concept called epigenetics, which is about the way that the genes that you have are controlled by other aspects of your body and your environment. And the recent work in epigenetics puts that right back to when one is in the womb at a very early stage, and indeed because of the way that the timing of where cells divide, your grandmother's womb as well, affecting your health status in the future. So the way in which particularly our first two speakers push back the timing of when interventions need to occur, the medical evidence is back even further.
Was there a specific question you wanted to put to the panel?
Well, I'd like to hear whether that's having an impact upon social thinking beyond the medical thinking, that where it certainly is having a big impact.
Thanks, Ted.
Okay. Yeah, I utterly agree with you. You know, we should be looking even, you know, for intergenerational effects. But the sorts of changes we were talking about introducing and improving the outcomes for children and disadvantaged children will mean that the subsequent generation will benefit from those epigenetic effects you're talking about, and the subsequent generation can even more. So we'll get cumulative benefits from the changes we introduce now.
In our children's centres, which are targeted in disadvantaged communities, we have about 3,000 in England. They are now picking up mothers as soon as the disadvantaged mothers in the bottom 10% of our population during pregnancy, and supporting them in children's centres. And once the midwives, the health visitors work with early childhood educators, and when the child is born, the parents and the child are supported up until the age of 2. So there is a real effort. Can't go back as far as the grandmothers because we don't know when the mothers are going to get pregnant, but certainly with health services working with us and sharing data, there is intervention getting there a little earlier.
Thanks, Erin. Did I see a hand over this side? I have yes, down the front here, thank you. And while you're going down there, I've got a question for Hugh. Hugh, you've written and spoken about what makes us tick. In today's global challenges, are those deep desires changing, or are they still as they were 5-10 years ago?
Yeah, thanks, Noel. The answer is no. They seem to be both universal and, if not eternal, then certainly very long-lasting. What does change, and it's a cultural effect primarily, what does change is the way we try to satisfy those desires. So the desire to connect, for example, which is absolutely fundamental for many people in 2013, it appears as though we might be able to satisfy that deep desire to connect with ourselves, knowing who we are, with each other, and with the natural world, all of which are fundamental to our sense of identity, our emotional health, our physical health. We can be seduced into thinking that the desire to connect can be an online connection, which is a bit like saying that you'll get the effects of communing with nature by watching a nature documentary, and the evidence is discouraging on that point, which is not to say there isn't an enormous amount of value in what online connections offer us, but it's a good example of how a basic desire looks for a different channel to satisfy. The desire to be taken seriously, the desire to belong, these are absolutely fundamental drivers of human behaviour. The way we satisfy them changes. The desire to belong used to be satisfied primarily by where we lived. We had a strong sense of living in a domestic herd, which was big enough to feel like a herd. That's 100 years ago in Australia. Now most of us, well, the average Australian household is 2.5 people. That's not a herd. So we have to look outside the domestic setting for herds to join without thinking about it and thinking this will contribute to my mental, emotional and physical health. We just know we are herd animals and we need to connect, so we join book clubs, we go to adult education courses, we sing in choirs. If we can't think of any other way of connecting, of belonging and connecting with the herd, we graze with the herd at the food court.
Thank you, Hugh. Question over there.
Test that a little bit, Hugh, because I think you probably need to engage in both now. If you take the example, I was reading an article about connecting and with social media or technology can help. If you just look at dating sites now, we have in our country 1 in 3 people meet on dating sites. Okay, it's changing the perception of the way we meet people and the way we interact and the way we conduct our relationships. But it's a huge transformation in society. It's maybe taboo to talk about it in a distinguished place like this. But I'd like to know how many people have met people on dating sites here. But don't feel you have to put your hand up. But then you have to meet the person. It's not quite like watching a documentary about dating or mating, but it's the beginning, and you need both, obviously. But I think that technology is transforming the way we connect, but it's not all negative, and there are consequences that we don't yet know about.
Yes, can I respond to that? And of course I agree that it's not negative only, it's positive and negative. There are many wonderful things about the connections we make online, and the heavy traffic on Facebook, for example, is between people who actually know each other. So it's a way of augmenting personal connections. And it's no longer, there's no stigma attached to dating sites. It turns out everyone's quite open about that. And a rising proportion of marriages are between people who met online. However, when people talk about falling in love online, then I get really worried.
Thanks, Hugh. Question over there. Thanks, Paul.
Our international visitors might be aware that we've had a recent federal election here in Australia, and I think it was announced today that they're going to be ripping millions of dollars out of the university sector, no doubt to put into preschools, I'm hoping. But there is actually, for those who follow the election, there is a very worried forklift driver living in Mount Druitt who has had the news broken to him recently that he's paying for the world's most expensive maternity leave scheme. I guess my question is that a mistake? Should we be putting that into preschools? The first thing. And the second part of the question is, there seems to be an inverse relationship between status and income, and from what the research shows in terms of where we should be investing our educational dollars, should we have more PhDs in preschools? Teaching in preschools, it seems to be where we get the most bang for the buck.
Okay, Ted's going to field that one. Thanks, Ted.
Yes, the answer is you get more bangs for your buck investing in preschool and almost any other aspect of the life cycle. And in Australia, we see some very interesting innovations, like the Early Start project in Illawarra, Illawarra, but New South Wales, which is based in Wollongong. And that's a very interesting initiative. And we see some very interesting initiatives in Victoria as well, and some other parts of Australia. But those initiatives stand out because they're so different from what the general run of the services is in Australia. I believe the statistic is 40% of children in Australia do not have access to preschool. Now that is going to hold back the development of children in preschool, the educational attainment of children in Australia, and subsequently the economic development of Australia, unless you change that. And I think that is an area where Australia needs to think about what's happening elsewhere in the world and how it can plan in order to produce the best outcomes for the population of Australia. Let me ask the audience a question. Which country in the world has shown the biggest increase in investment in early education in the last 10 years? No. Cuba already had a very high level, and so it hasn't shown a big increase. No, the answer is China. Now, China hasn't shown this massive investment in early childhood education because it thinks of the goodness of all the lives of all these little kiddies. Now, it's because it sees it as a fundamental step in developing the infrastructure of the society so that they become the primary economic power in the world by 2050. I'm sorry?
It's not affordable for lots of people in Australia.
That's right. Exactly. And that's what I'm saying. You need to act at a national level to change the situation in Australia. I'm trying to give you a message.
Thank you so much, Ted. We're going to move on. We've got another question at the front here, and then we've got one more question after that. So now all the hands are going up. We'll take the gentleman behind in the pale blue shirt. We'll get a mic to you, but Brad and then...
I was just wondering if you thought that changing the focus and measures in education from competition to maybe an individual growth type thing, so it's not competing against each other, it's competing against yourself yesterday sort of thing, might be a beneficial thing in the education system.
Well, I've got an answer to that, I think Hugh might well also have an answer to that in terms of the balance between competition. I mean, if we look at the nature of human nature, competition is part of human nature, but also cooperation is part of human nature. And one needs to develop the capacities of children to do both and to have a balance between both. I think what happens when educational practices go awry is where the balance is lost between facilitating and fostering the capacity for competition and the capacity for collaboration.
Thank you, Iram, and then we'll take the next question.
In our longitudinal study, it was quite interesting how children's social and behavioural development wasn't linked very significantly to child outcomes, developmental outcomes, until the children reached about 11. And then self-regulation came out as being pretty significant to outcomes in English and mathematics national assessments. Self-regulation isn't necessarily about competition. Yeah. It's about an intrinsic understanding of achievement and value. So it was the children who persevere and concentrate in the face of challenge. They don't reach out for external cheap gratification, that is pleasing the teacher or being praised, but they're thinking about how they can achieve something and feel value through their own actions in an activity or a series of activities. So I think that that is an interesting drive that we should be developing in education, helping children to concentrate, to persevere, and to feel good about doing things for themselves.
I didn't mean get rid of all competition. You could compete on how much you've grown yourself. Yes. Do you know what I mean? So that could be the measure, as opposed to, I think the identity of people comes around too much on a score or too much on a measure, so they become that score or that measure rather than how much they're growing and continue.
As our children got older, it's quite interesting. In the pedagogical studies we did of what they're doing in schools, for boys in particular, they like the slight edge of competition. I'm not talking about heavy competition, but competing with peers and so on. So it was a combination, you're right.
Also, while I presented evidence with regard to what might be called cognitive skills in the graphs I was showing and so on, that was purely a matter of convenience and because the data was very easily understandable and available. We also have data on the non-cognitive skills and the capacity for empathy, the capacity for pro-social behavior, sharing and so on, and self-regulation, as Jeremy say, and we're finding similar effects on those good social skills also occurring from these early life experiences.
This is why I think it's particularly important to have longitudinal studies, and universities need to fight for resources that allow us to follow children over time. If our study had been for 3 years or 5 years, we wouldn't have been able to show the effect of something like self-regulation. There are sometimes sleeper effects in some of the things that children are experiencing that show up later on, maybe as teenagers or adults.
Thank you. Your question.
Yeah, final question, I think. If children go to school earlier, do we need preschools?
Now, there's a big movement in Europe to make children go to school later, and this, particularly in the UK, and this movement is based upon the evidence, for example, that in Finland they have the highest educational attainment of any country in the world. Yet children start school later in Finland than any country in the world. What those people fail to realize is that every child in Finland, yes, 99% of children in Finland, goes to a preschool from age 3 onwards. And the majority also go to some form of childcare even before 3. So effectively in Finland you're getting educational input, as it were, certainly from age 3 upwards. But it's not necessarily educational input of a kind which you think, oh, they're all sat in the classroom and on the desks and being taught things. No, it's basically a play-based education. And play-based education is actually very good for 3-year-olds and for 5-year-olds. And I can tell you, it's also very good for 60-year-olds. So to answer your question,
does that have to be in a different location than a current school?
No, no. I mean, you could have school. You could, for example, have preschools automatically attached to all schools, and then just have a seamless transition, as it were, between the preschool environment and an integration with the early primary school environment.
I've been told by my secret sources that we can take 2 more questions, so I might go to a different side of the room. Okay, we'll have to go, who's up the back there? Okay, lady in the centre there. Raise your hand up high so that our microphone can get to you. Yep, here she is. And was there one more down here? And lady in the green top here next. Okay, thank you. Your question?
Oh. As one of those pesky early childhood professionals getting a PhD, how would you suggest we work with our government to educate them about the cost of return and so on? The research all backs up everything that you're saying, we know it, and yet governments seem very reluctant to fund early childhood education to the tune of free access for families. Any suggestions from your experience in the UK?
Would you like to field that one? And if any of our other panellists have a comment, please jump in.
We've been fairly successful in influencing governments. And I find in talking to governments, what you say, oh, we already know all this. You're an early childhood educator. Yes, you know it. But you're not able to produce hard evidence for what you know. And this is the problem. You can tell them what you know, and they won't believe you. But if you can produce hard evidence, you stand a much greater chance of affecting them. And what I found, it was only when we produced evidence on hard outcomes like educational attainment that they started to pay attention. And when we made clear to them the economic costs to the government of not getting these benefits, that they really started to pay attention. So politicians have to be grabbed by the relatives in terms of the economic consequences of their actions in order to get them to act. Also, in dealing with politicians, I find if you produce the weakest evidence imaginable, but it happens to coincide with their ideology, they'll believe you. If you produce the most wonderful evidence in the world, and it's against their ideology, they won't believe you. And you have to aim for those politicians in the middle, as it were, where you produce hard evidence and you will change the minds of politicians who aren't committed one way or the other.
Thanks so much, Ted. We've got to move on to our final question. Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm a social worker with a background in child and family health. So I was interested when Ted spoke about the Perry study, and the thing that I wanted to point out was, or expand on, was the importance of, in that study in particular, the effect that they had on the mothers, because they were teaching mothers and modelling to mothers how to be good parents. And I think that, as well as the education, preschool education, and the attachment of the mothers and the fathers to the children is a really important area. And I was wondering if you had something else to add.
We'll let Iram bring us home, I think, with this one.
Well, I will pass on to Ted because he conducted the evaluation of the Sure Start Children's Centres, which were set up just to do that. But I do think even in the Perry preschool study, the report on the 1.5 hours of home visits and parent intervention is underreported. And I do believe that that has a huge impact because it impacts on the quality of the relationships of the infant, mother dyad, of the toddler, the preschooler, and the quality of those interactions and their understanding of what their child needs, and the quality of the home learning environment, which is independent, which has an independent effect from social class. But at that time, some of those things weren't known, so I don't think they monitored that as effectively as they monitored the preschool work. And of course, all the staff had master's degrees. They were highly trained, and there were ratios of 1:6 in the programme.
I can only agree with you wholeheartedly, actually. But one of the most effective ways of getting parental change is through their engagement with the centres. And what we find, for example, in our early childhood centres in England, where we looked at which were the most effective, and where Iram did some case studies on those centres, we found that the most effective centres, one of the things that they did is they were much more successful in engaging parents to do things with the child in the home that complemented what was happening in the centre. And there have been some studies which have compared parenting-owned interventions, centre interventions, and combining parent and centre. And it's always the combination of parent and centre interventions which are the most effective.
Thank you so much for your questions. And I know there were some people who we didn't get to their questions. We'll continue that over refreshments informally with our panel members, and to those panel members who got off a bit lightly then, they'll still be around to answer your questions. Now, to close off our formal proceedings, I'd like to invite to the microphone the Executive Dean of the Faculty of Social Sciences, Mr. John Steele.
Thank you, Neril. One of the regrets with sessions like this, sometimes you just wish you could keep going. There's an amazing amount of interaction. I'd like to thank our speakers for very thoughtful and thought-provoking talks. Around early childhood, around health, around the contributions of geography, around interventions and practical examples of the way research and transformation from Noel. It was a really, really great talk and thought-provoking. I think it's part of what we do at universities and institutions, and I think this event is a good example of us trying to communicate some of the things that are happening in universities and how they have an impact on the community. Part of what we want to do is challenge the way people are thinking, starting conversations about these things and looking at solutions to world challenges and starting those changes in behaviour. What tonight is about is raising awareness, challenging us all to think and to engage our communities. Our presenters tonight from overseas and URW have done a wonderful job in starting some of those important conversations. Before presenting a small gift of appreciation and one or two pillows for our jet-lagged colleagues here, I've been watching Noel most of the day today, he's just about ready to doze off. Can I ask you to thank Professor Ziram Siraj, Noel Castry, Tony Gattrell, Sandra Jones, Hugh Mackay and Ted Maluish. And I think we have some gifts which Adam and Lindsay are going to hand out. So there's a bit of rattling. Sandra, this is not alcohol. Yeah. Or it's not that education wine that Ian's been sort of handing around. We've got some really good stuff here. Yeah. Now, Noel, I don't know how you're going to get those on the plane. We might have to upgrade you to business class on the way back or something. Yeah. Yeah. You look lovely with flowers there, Adam. It's wonderful, wonderful. And look, can I finally say thank you? I know we've gone a little bit over time, but it's wonderful to see so many people here engaging in this process. But I'd also like to thank a number of the people that have contributed to advertising this event, putting it on today, doing a lot of work behind the scenes. From the Global Challenges team, which worked with Judy Raper, Professor Chris Gibson, who got off lightly because he's in New Zealand with the children, looking after the children at the moment. Dr. Tamantha Stutchbury from also the Global Challenges office. Adam Thorgood, Kobe Hislop from the Marketing Department in Social Sciences. Professor Ian Brown, who chaired our planning committee for this event and has done a great job, and he can hand back his prescription for Valium after tonight when we're finished. And especially to Tracy Creel and Lindsay Frigo, who are both well known to all of our guests who have travelled from overseas. From me, it's been wonderful having you here. We've got you here for the rest of the week, engaging the contributions you've made to the faculty, to our planning retreat, and tonight. Thank you very, very much. Thank you. And if people would like to have a refreshment, non-alcoholic, because Sandra's here, I'm just watching us. So we go out. If you turn right as you go out, don't go through the front doors, but head over to Building 67. Just follow the crowd and the ushers. We can have a non-alcoholic drink and something to eat. Thank you.